Yeah, it's a nighttime and fright time show. Sit back and enjoy. Peace. I'm Gonchi Dankman.
Into junk food fueled nights of gaming, desperately trying to experience everything the game had to offer before I had to return it. I'm sure others could see the downfall of blockbusters happening as the market began to prefer shipped products and digital media. For me, though, the change happened within just a month. My trips to the store was less frequent as I got on in years and started to explore other avenues of acquiring media, but I would still make the occasional trips. I always felt guilty if enough time passed without me visiting. On one of my visits, I had seen several deals were taking place with big signs eccentrically stating new promotions. One of the telltale signs of declining business. Something just trying to recoup losses. With my next visit, the lights are off and the shelves are being cleared, and that marked the end of my tradition. Years would go by, and I would find myself following in my father's footsteps. My innate love for cinema and the knowledge my dad passed on to me guided me into a field of filmmaking. Silly little slasher indie films shot on a camcorder with my friends, movies that I thought had a deep and meaningful message that I can only describe now as pretentious nonsense. I started picking up speed after college and was starting to get some semblance of notoriety in the film community. Fame had far from struck, but I was a ways off from where my father ended his career. But I was content. The visits to Blockbuster had become distant but pleasant memories, the kind I would recall on bleak, rainy days or sleepless nights. As far as I was concerned, every Blockbuster had shut down and the franchise was just gone. One night, I had lamented this to my friend while I was editing one of my passion projects. I couldn't help but think how cool it would be to have a movie I had a hand in making resting on one of those shelves. The bargain bin at Walmart just doesn't have the same appeal. She was borderline jubilant to explain that there was still a Blockbuster up and running, that it even had a social media handle. Focusing on my project became nearly impossible as we dived deeper into plans to visit the location. It wasn't nearly as far of a trip as I thought. It was surprising I hadn't heard of this place, living so close. While I waited for the trip, I finished my movie and burned it onto a DVD. Even got one of my friends to do the cover art. My movie was going on that shelf, even if it was just for a moment. I would mark the memory. The day came in seemingly no time, and with a full bag of junk food, we headed out. The drive only took about a day, but I couldn't have been giddier. Some part of me deep down was nervous when I pulled into the parking lot. It sounds silly. It was like seeing an old friend after years apart. I didn't know what to say or talk about, despite having a whole life of experiences. Pulling into the parking lot paled in comparison to walking through the doors. This surge of nostalgia and novelty washed over me, and I was thrown into the days of my youth. Movies lined the walls, and snacks sat by the checkout. Even the smell felt familiar. How can something like a smell stay so consistent after all those years? We spent hours in there, talking with the staff and rummaging through various aisles, looking at movies that we'd never heard of. The place was pretty busy too, just people shopping for movies or taking selfies. It was so surreal, and once the nostalgia started to fade, it felt like it always had, and I liked that. Before we knew it, the sun was starting to go down, and the store had become empty, apart from the manager and us. We had talked to the manager quite a bit, and even got to gush about the film we were making. So She allowed us to stay while she started closing up. The front doors locked, the lights dimmed, and we continued to chat while she tallied up the day's work. The store took on a different atmosphere once the traffic had vanished and we were left alone. The hum of the overhanging fluorescents and the blinking red light from the security camera behind the counter pulled at my attention. I eyed the red light as it went on and off. "Does that record all night?" I asked the woman, shuffling through paper bills. She replied that it was certainly supposed to. Looking at the black lens of the camera, I could make out the faintest outline in its reflection. Something off. Then, the blinking red light stopped. I looked back down. I told the manager that the blinking had ceased. She didn't move for a moment, and then looked up at the camera. When it failed to blink, she quickly rose up from her seat and told us to follow her. The words were horrid and almost felt like we were being scolded, but we did so anyway. We made our way into an office that was closed off from the rest of the store. In the room was a desk, a safe, and various piles of paper documents. There was also a set of overhanging TVs that were displaying the live camera feed. When I looked at the camera feeds, I was surprised to see that someone else was still in the store. When I attempted to tell the manager about the person, she just replied that she already knew about him. The manager was moving papers all around while mumbling to herself. She was saying, "Where is it?" over and over. Just under the TV screens, there was an old VHS player and a series of wires connected to it that ran into small holes in a square and metal panel. Interrupting her chanting, the manager told us to let her know if the man on the TV started to move. Staring at the old man, dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, I was confused about how I hadn't seen him after the doors were locked. I could see my friend's eyes were glued to the feed, so I backed away, just enough to see outside of the door. Shifting my gaze between the interior of the store and the feed on the TV, I felt myself let out a chuckle. "I think the feed is broken," I exclaimed to the manager as I looked out into the rest of the store. "There's no one there." "It needs to be recorded," the manager replied, almost completely ignoring me. I felt a prickle of curiosity. That was when a car drove by, and its headlights flooded into the store, cascading beams through the shelves. I heard my friend exclaim that he could see the light of the car caused on the camera, that the feed was live. She had even seen my shadow shifting when I was looking back and forth from the screen and store. Keeping my eyes fixated on the camera feed, my wonder shifted to uncertainty and spiraled into horror when the old man stepped forward. His movements were rigid and shaky, causing artifacts on the feed. It was like he was thawing out, so his muscles weren't capable of smooth movements. My voice shook, but I told the manager about his advance, and at the same time, she exclaimed that she found what she was looking for. A small keychain that held just one bronze key. Camera feed started to fizzle, like a wave of static had corrupted it. The lights within the store started to brighten, and the soft glow they had during the day shifted to a harsh and obnoxious white. I took a glance out the office door, doing my best to shield my eyes from the light and get a look at what was out there. Though I couldn't see the old man with my own eyes, I could tell where he was. Space, where he existed on camera, was distorted. It was like the blocky, and out of focus textures and a poorly rendered video game. And with each step he made forward, the effect's radius expanded. The carpet of the store that was under where his feet would be started to take on the same static effect you'd get from a satellite TV. Looking back to the manager, I watched her messing around with a collection of wires, this time whispering, "Please," to herself. When she was satisfied with her work, she stepped back and looked up at the TVs. The old man was still stepping forward, spreading his distortion into our world like a virus. But it became apparent he was slowing down. Slowly, he and the effects he brought with him started to halt their progress. The manager let out a heavy sigh as the bizarre effects around the man began to dissipate. She looked at both of us, surely noticing our awe-struck expressions. "He needs to be recorded," she repeated. This time, those words were more of a threat. The nostalgia in that blockbuster was unmatched for me. Even after that experience, I was able to get the picture from my DVD sitting on the shelf. When you walk into that store, you might feel like your younger self again, like you are lost to time. In that store, there is a being that is truly lost to time though, one that needs to be recorded or he'll start to catch up. That store needs to remain running. A careful watch needs to remain on the mechanics of that VHS player. I'd hate to imagine what would happen if a being like that was able to roam free. I loved visiting that store, but I don't see myself ever going back. Some things should stay in the past. Even now, as I look at the picture of my DVD sitting on the shelf, I can see the old man. It's just his head, peeking over the line of movies, but I can see his face clear as day. The brown liver spots and ghostly white hair, his bright and almost unnatural yellow eyes, and a smile. A beaming smile, one that knows it has all the time it needs, because even the last blockbuster will have to close someday. My wife and I have a tradition. Every anniversary, after we go to whatever theatre or fancy restaurant we can scrape enough dough for, we give each other a present. She gets me a new tie, and I get her a cartoon. Growing up, my wife
Time to
loved
tell your
animated television
followers to
shows.
get in
It
here.
was her hobby. When she wasn't doing schoolwork, chores, or playing with her friends, she was watching cartoons. She continued this habit from diapers to art school, and had built up quite the collection, sprawling across a collection of DVDs, VHS tapes, laserdiscs, and even some film reels. That's actually how I got to know her. I liked to talk to her about what animated shows were my favorites while she painted. So, every year, I try and find some cartoon she's never heard of. I don't always succeed, but I was riding high after last year's victory. I had managed to scrape up an ancient Ukrainian VHS in a book nook. It only cost me $3, and thankfully it didn't crumble to dust by the time I got home with it. This year, I was determined to beat her again. But work had been pretty busy lately. I'm a substitute elementary school teacher, and the flu had knocked a good number of teachers out of commission, so I was pretty much busy all day. As luck would have it, I found my salvation in my colleague, Milos. Milos was referred to exclusively as Mr. C by all the students, since his Eastern European last name rolled off the tongue like a sea urchin. A grey haired man in his early 60s, he spoke with a heavy accent and was notorious for never remembering anybody's name. But all the kids liked him, thanks to his polite, harmless nature, and the faculty was quite fond of him too. One afternoon, during lunch, I was in the teacher's lounge drinking a soda, and in came Milos. I waved, and he gave me a smile in return. He bought himself some peanut butter crackers from the vending machine and sat down across from me. We talked for a little while about whatever stupid decision the school board had made, and the conversation eventually changed to that of our wives. He had been married for 30 years, so he had much more to say than the 5 I'd been together with my spouse. I told him about our anniversary tradition, and he sat up a little straighter. It's funny you should mention that. I was going through my attic last week, and I found a box of my mother's video cassettes. Really? That's interesting. What was inside? I asked. Most of them were old recordings of me as a young man, but one of them was a cartoon I had never seen before. My wife would probably know what it is. What's it called? I'm not sure, Milo said, pausing to think. But I'd never seen anything like it. Quite strange. I only watched one episode before I lost interest. I asked him if I could borrow it to see if my wife had somehow overlooked whatever cartoon this was. Ah, you can have it, Milo said with a wave of his hand. I'm too old for such things. You mean it? Yes, the condition is poor, but it still runs in the VCR. We made an agreement, and Milo showed up the next day with a tape. I offered to buy him lunch in exchange, but he politely refused, saying, "Getting rid of some of the clutter is payment enough." I examined the tape, tucked into a blank sleeve with some text drawn on it in Sharpie. It was written in Cyrillic characters, so I had no idea what it said. But there looked to be 11 episodes of this strange cartoon recorded onto it. So I completed my day and came home at around 5. My wife wouldn't be home until 8, since she was attending an auction. So after I finished my paperwork and ate some supper, I decided to see if the tape contained anything that my wife's watchful eye may have accidentally overlooked. I went to the living room with a glass of white wine and our cat, Frisbee, and popped the old VHS into the tape player, sitting on the love seat with Frisbee purring in my lap. I had laid my laptop next to me so I could decipher some of the text if need be. It took a couple of seconds, but I soon saw the tracking signal show up on screen. The only semblance of credits was a few words that briefly flashed on the black screen. They were written in plain white text, and I paused the tape to type the words into Google Translate. As you all know, Translate, but it claimed that the words were Bulgarian and translated to something like, "This is the first episode." The episode started in what looked like a college dorm room. The only occupied one had someone sleeping under the covers. This person woke up and tossed his covers off. He looked like an average college kid, with scruffy facial hair and a university t-shirt on. He ambled away into the bathroom, which was off screen, and, after a few sounds of rustling clothes on running water, walked back on screen in a jacket and toque. One thing I noticed off the bat was the meticulous detail put into the art and animation. The backgrounds had all kinds of extra things to look at. A model airplane halfway built sitting on a desk, open drawers with clothes hanging out of them, the light of the window fading and reappearing in accordance to unseen clouds. Every frame of the character's walk cycle was unique. No reused shots or loops. Every step he took was slightly different than his last one. If this was a weekly cartoon, the animators must have been working pretty damn hard to deliver this level of quality. Anyway, this character left his room and walked down an empty hallway, his sneakers making hollow thumping noises against the ground. Once again, sounding like each sound effect was unique. It reminded me of Courage the Cowardly Dog. The creators claimed that they wanted to make a cartoon based largely around sound. For all I knew, this could have been their inspiration. The protagonist left the building, the outdoors a dreary-looking representation of an urban landscape with a layer of what was either mist or smog hanging over the tops of the windowless buildings. There was no soundtrack, just the sound of his feet on the pavement and urban ambience in the background. The distant roar of traffic on a freeway, the occasional shrill backing up signal. Once I heard the squeak of brakes, though oddly enough, I didn't see a single vehicle. I could see the individual wisps of breath rise from the protagonist's mouth, implying it must have been cold out. So far, so good. I didn't recognize anything, and I doubt my wife had seen anything like this. The whole thing had a level of pretentiousness that she fell for hook, line, and sinker. Minutes came and went as I watched this poker-faced young man walk to whatever destination he was heading to. It didn't take long for me to lose interest. Good animation or not, boring is still boring. And watching this kid trudge down an empty street wasn't all that riveting in my opinion. The only event worth mentioning during this endless walk was when the kid walked past somebody else. The angle of the shot was positioned so it faced the stranger's back, and they were dressed in heavy clothes too, and the two passed each other with a quick greeting without even looking at each other. He stopped all of a sudden, in front of a largish building, and he looked up at it. Even though it lacked any defining features, the boy seemed to recognize it and went through the door. When he entered, there was a small group of girls, all holding thermoses, talking quietly in the corner of the lobby of whatever building this was, and they all went silent when the protagonist drew close to them. He stopped and he stared at them. The girls all looked like they were trying to hold back laughter, and the guy had the same bland expression he had the entire episode. They stared for a good 5 seconds before one of the girls promptly threw the contents of her cup into the guy's face. He winced and stumbled back with a hand over his eyes. Apparently, they found their random act of cruelty hilarious, because they started cackling like harpies. The scene switched back to the guy, who was now covering his whole face, liquid running down his hands and dribbling all over the floor. As he tried to right himself, he slipped and fell, landing back first onto the floor. The girls' laughter was rekindled, and now they were pointing and drawing as much attention as possible, despite the fact that no one else was around. I was shocked when I saw the skin on his face was blistering. That beverage in the thermos must have been hot. After the poor kid got back to his feet, he pushed past them and traveled deeper into the building. The girls threw what was left of their beverages at him as he fled. The episode ended with a close-up of the main character's blistered, distraught face. At this point, I had to fast forward because the speakers had suddenly released a deafeningly loud shriek. Frisbee fled out of shock, and I seriously think that if my volume had been turned up any higher, my wine glass might have shattered. Thankfully, that seemed to be the end of the episode, so I didn't have long to wait before I could go back to normal speed. I turned my volume down to almost silent and warily pressed the play button. The electronic wailing had vanished, and apparently another episode was beginning. The title card read, "And this is the second one." It was identical to the way the first episode began, beginning with the protagonist, his face unblemished, climbing out of his dormitory bed. My initial thought was that there was a recording mistake, but this theory was quickly debunked when I realized that the protagonist was in a different set of pajamas. This time, instead of going to the bathroom, the kid went to the desk next to his bed and sat down. In one motion, he swept all of the clutter off the surface. Papers and food wrappers fell to the ground beside him, and the model plane smashed into dozens of little pieces. He opened the top of the drawer and removed a sewing kit, placing it onto the desk. It cut to a view of his face, staring down at the palm-sized kit on the desk. He withdrew another object from Hammerspace. For those unaware, Hammerspace is the area where all cartoon characters pull their supplies from. That is to say, nowhere. It was a doll, a crude, stereotypical caricature of a baby. Its eyes were gazing off into the distance, and the mouth was puckered into a dopey little O, with blushing red cheeks and hair the colour of sand. The protagonist stared down at this doll with the same poker face he had kept up since the first episode. He then picked up the needle from the sewing kit, threaded it, and began to work on the doll. The shot was angled in a way that you couldn't see the doll's face while he sewed it. The screen showed the protagonist's face as he worked for a good minute. Then he appeared to have finished, and it showed the end result. The doll's face was snarled in black thread. Its eyes were now X'd out, and a sinister grin was formed with tiny, vertical lines serving as the mouth, and two longer diagonal ones shaped in a way to resemble eyebrows. The cute, innocent-looking little thing now looked like some kind of wicked voodoo artifact. The protagonist stared down at his masterpiece and actually cracked a tiny smile. As macabre as his creation was, he seemed genuinely proud of it. The episode ended after that. I've seen some bizarre animation in my life, from coonskin to heavy metal to the triplets of Belleville. But this was the type of thing you'd find in David Lynch's garbage disposal. The kind of artsy, disturbing crap that some uber-Christian mom probably thought contained a demonic message telling kids to eat babies. But hell, it was unique. And it was free, so I decided to use it. I was about to stop the VCR, but then the next title card popped up. Instead of just a few words, this one looked like a whole essay. The entire screen taken up by words. Credits, maybe? Just to satiate my curiosity, I typed a few words into Translate to see what it said. IS-san, hello, this is my... It was a message. Now intrigued, I typed the rest of the text, and, accounting for Google Translate's many mistakes, I think the message roughly translates to something like this. IS-san, hello, this is my animation for Academy. I labored, maybe worked, on it for a long time, and I have, for you, I hope or wish you enjoy, and I will do it soon. Further research taught me that Iasen is a Bulgarian male name, and, coincidentally, there's an artist named Iasen Gioselev, who's done a lot of illustrations for children's books, who's also, you guessed it, Bulgarian. Whether or not this is the same Iasen this message was addressed to is beyond me. But there you go. The third episode had the exact same beginning as the first two, and I was sensing a pattern forming here. The same kid got out of bed, wandered into the bathroom, freshened himself up, and came back fully dressed. Looking carefully, I found the stitched-faced doll from the previous episode on his desk, the needle jabbed vertically into its forehead. It was eerily familiar to the first episode. but with an entirely new set of animations to show the exact same events unfolding. I wasn't looking forward to watching the kid make his pilgrimage to that building again, so I took the opportunity to use the bathroom while the tape ran. Unfortunately, while I was out of the room, that ear-shattering squeal rang out again, and I had to hurry back to shut it off once more. I kept the audio muted for my sanity's sake as I watched the next scene unfold. The girls, who had mercilessly harassed the protagonist earlier, were nowhere to be found, and he continued into the next room without incident. It was a large room, presumably an auditorium, with a bunch of folding chairs set up in front of a raised platform. On this platform stood a new character, a man about my age, with Coke bottle glasses and a dorky pink tie. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say he was supposed to be a professor, since the protagonist was clearly in college. After a few more people filtered into the room and sat in the audience, the professor, as I'll call him, began talking. I tried turning the sound on to hear what he was talking about, but the audio was overlaid with screeching, so I had no choice but to mute it. I did my best to try read his lips, but I think the dialogue must have been in Bulgarian too. About a minute into his lecture, the professor took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes before putting them back on and continuing. He was either really engaged with whatever he was talking about, or really angry about it, because he was going off the rails. I could see his face flushing and beads of sweat emerging on his brow. The audience of about 6 people didn't seem to care in the slightest. Mid-rant, the professor's eyes bugged out of his head, and he grabbed his neck, as though he was choking. His glasses fell off, and his tongue stuck out rigidly as he stumbled around, grasping at his throat. It was animated with hideous detail. I could see every individual vein swelling up on his neck, and someone even took the time to animate the ribbons of drool running down his chin. Despite his obvious distress, not one of the audience members budged an inch, staring at him with bored indifference. Eventually, the professor collapsed onto his back and lay spread-eagled on the platform, 2 streams of blood trickling from his eyes, as though he had just been strangled. The audience sat there for a moment, before calmly getting up and exiting, not looking or speaking to one another. The episode ended with an overhead view of the auditorium, the professor left abandoned on the stage. From this point on, I'm not going to describe every single episode with such detail for brevity's sake. I'll just summarize the basic plot and show what the title card at the beginning said. Episode 4. Text. It should be clear what this is. The protagonist goes to his desk again and starts writing on a piece of paper, scratching at the back of his neck constantly. Near the end of the episode, the protagonist examines his fingers, which are now bloody. A shot of his neck reveals a giant welt, which he seemed to have scratched to the point of bleeding. Episode 5. Text. I wish it could have been this easy. The protagonist picks up the piece of paper he was writing on, which still has bloody fingerprints on it, and tucks it into an envelope, exiting his room with it. He goes to a new building, which resembles another dorm, and slides the letter under the door of another room marked 056. He leaves, and a close-up on his neck reveals a bandage, which he promptly tears off. The wound from the last episode is absent. Episode 6. Text. It was so... and a word I can't translate. The protagonist goes to another new building, a dining hall. He meets the stranger from the first episode, whose face is still hidden, and the two sit down together and talk. The rest of the episode is only one shot, an over-the-shoulder view of the protagonist from behind his friend. As the two of them talk, one can see a member of the kitchen staff overzealously tenderizing a chunk of meat in the background, bits of gristle flying all over the place. The episode ends after the stranger gets up and exits, leaving the protagonist to sit by himself and stare into space. Episode 7. Text. I tried not to blank what I was or maybe felt. The protagonist goes to his desk again and starts scratching down the beginnings of another note. The camera cuts away at about the 2-minute mark to the door, where an envelope is slid under it into the room. The protagonist goes to pick it up and suddenly becomes very excited when he sees the sender. He returns to his desk with an eager look in his eyes and sits down to open it. The camera faces his back as he reads it, sitting silently. He starts to tremble. He balls his fists, crumbles the note into a wad, and hurling it against the wall. He storms into the bathroom, and the rest of the episode is spent staring at an empty room and hearing the kid shouting and crying off screen. Episode 8. Text. That isn't important. This is the shortest episode, narrowly escaping the 4-minute mark. The protagonist is absent, his bed empty. Instead, the opposite bed is shown to have someone in it, someone who's neither visible nor asleep. The figure twitches and thrashes around under the covers, but is unable to get up. The reason is clear. The blanket is anchored to the bed with barbed wire, each length tied to an opposite side of the bed frame, so the person, at least I assume it's a person, was tied to the bed like luggage to the top of a car. The figure squirms for a good while before going limp. Episode 9. There was no title card for this episode. This episode has its typical beginning. The protagonist getting up and putting his clothes on. The opposite bed is unoccupied again, with no signs of a previous struggle. The protagonist stops halfway to the door and turns around. He looks directly into the camera, smiling, and starts talking. I had pumped the volume down to barely audible to avoid any more yelping from the speakers, so I tentatively turned it up a few notches. I was immediately punished for my curiosity when that ghastly wail presented itself again, drowning out any semblance of dialogue, and I silenced it in disgust. The protagonist speaks to the viewer for a few minutes, laughing every once in a while, and then exits, ending the episode. Episode 10. This episode was shown from the top-down perspective and appears to pick up exactly where episode 9 left off. The camera follows the protagonist on his walk to the same building he traveled to in episodes 1 and 3, zooming out to an almost outrageous degree when the camera enters the outdoors. It got to a point where the protagonist was merely an ant-sized figure scuttling down a turgid collection of identical coloured rectangles. It was at this point where the video appeared to have been damaged, the image being shredded by stripes of black and white static and jerking violently. I heard the VCR give a panicked whir as it tried to make sense of the corrupted film, and eventually the TV screen was engulfed in snow. I should have been pleased that I wouldn't have to watch anymore, but there was an inkling of curiosity I couldn't get rid of. True, the show's narrative had been wafer thin at best, but I kind of wanted to see the 11th episode, just to see if it brought the plot it pretended to have to a close. I got my wish. As I was searching for the remote, the static on the screen flickered. I paid no mind at first, until it flickered again, this time more violently. The wall of hissing nonsense that covered the screen was flinching, like something on the other side was trying to force its way out. And, all at once, the picture snapped back into existence. It was another title card. Thankfully, I'd found the remote, and I got the chance to pause it and type the text into Google Translate. It read, "This is my favorite episode." I remember letting out a noise of confusion when I unpaused the tape. It showed an empty room with 4 chairs arranged in an untidy row, a small table sitting beside them. The animation was completely different from the previous episodes. Unlike the pseudo-Disney, hand-drawn nature of the previous 10, episode 11 looked more like it had been rotoscoped. Rotoscoping is an animation technique where artists trace over live-action footage frame by frame. It's a very old practice. If you've ever seen the music video for Take On Me, you can get the idea of what the scene looked like, except much less professional. The image remained static for a few moments until someone appeared in the chair, second from the left, after a jump cut. It was a girl, unconscious from the way she was slumped over. Soon after, another girl blipped under the frame, seated on the farthest right, similarly limp. Eventually, all 4 chairs were occupied by an unconscious girl. Even though I probably shouldn't have, I unmuted the television. There was no shrieking anymore, or any noise at all for that matter. I jumped when the silence was broken by a loud creak, followed by some footsteps. There was a noticeable dip in audio quality, the sound being muffled and dull. When the footsteps stopped, there was a short thud and a shrill noise that sounded like someone undoing a zipper. The angle was obstructed when a body moved in front of the camera. With the boiling lines of the rotoscoped figure twitching like mad, it took a second for me to realize that this person was showing a small cylindrical object to the audience. The person set it down on the small table and removed a tiny pill from their pocket, promptly swallowing it. They turned to one of the girls, who was still unconscious, and gently shook her. When there was no response, they sighed and walked off screen, returning a few seconds later with a bucket. They threw the contents of the bucket directly onto her face, the girl waking with a frightened squeal. After she blinked and spluttered for a few moments, she looked up at the offender. A look of absolute horror spread across her face. The person spoke, disclosing his identity as a male. Then, I felt my stomach tighten. I knew that voice. It was the protagonist. I haven't the slightest idea of what he said, but the girl furiously shook her head to deny whatever he accused her of. He then lunged at her and seized a handful of her hair, the girl beginning to scream and sob hysterically. The protagonist snatched the cylinder off the table and shoved it into the audience a second time, before a knife sprung from the other end. It was a switchblade. He then drove it into the girl's neck. She was unable to scream now. The blade must have hit her larynx. A feeble gurgling noise was the only thing that she had left. The protagonist removed the knife, blood spurting from the wound. This was the only thing that had any colour through the entire segment, being a muddy red. The girl beside her had woken up and was set to screaming when she saw her neighbour gagging on her own blood. The protagonist clapped a hand over her mouth, slitting her throat with one quick slash. I couldn't take it anymore. This had officially crossed the line. I lunged for the remote, but I moved too quickly and knocked it off its place on the armrest, and it tumbled out of reach. Cursing myself, I got down on all fours and grasped for it, trying to ignore the agonized screams and pleading coming from the television. By the time I found it, it was too late. The deed had been done. The body's lying in monochrome silence. I was seconds from pushing the damn eject button, seconds from contacting Milos and demanding what kind of sick joke he had played on me. But I didn't. Something stopped me. The protagonist, the murderer, had taken something out of his jacket and now aimed it in the direction of the corpses. A cell phone. It wasn't even an old-fashioned model. It looked identical to an iPhone. The animator even shaded the Apple logo to make it more pronounced. That wasn't possible. This was an old cartoon. There was no way in hell there could have been an iPhone in it. And besides, if this really was a recent cartoon, why was it on a crappy VHS? And how did it end up in the possession of an Eastern European substitute teacher? Did Milos make it? Was this his idea of a practical joke? The last few minutes of the tape consisted of the protagonist taking pictures of his victims, but every time he snapped a photo, there would be a cut to a different image. It was the same scene, but it was live action, with grisly, full-color images of the girls and their wounds. The tape ended with a final message, which I had no time to translate. I was busy rifling through one of the kitchen drawers of the school directory. I finally found it and tracked down Miles' number. I'd never contacted him before, but I needed answers.
We are happy to provide a little
Now,
stereo
for so
side.
why would
That's right, just a little
her smile evaporated
scarier
when she saw my
than your
expression?
normal nighttime
You're
show.
pale.
So tell all
Do
the
you
friends
feel
you
right?
know.
She inquired. I need to make a phone call, I managed to say. I grabbed the phone off the receiver and dialed in the number, while my concerned wife went to put her things away. I paced the kitchen as I listened to the taunting buzz of the connection noise in my ear. Finally, Milos picked up the phone. Hello? I was ready to let him have it. I didn't want my wife to hear anything. Milos, it's Greg Sykes. I need to talk to you about the tape you gave me. Oh, hello, Greg. I'm sorry to hear that you're having trouble. Is it broken? The naivety in his voice made me want to throw the phone across the room. No, it's what's on the tapes. This isn't funny. In fact, it's pretty damn sick. Did you honestly think that giving me some fake snuff movie from my wife would be cute? There was a pause. I don't understand. Episode 11, Milos. Those dead girls. What are you talking about? Stop playing innocent. I kept my voice low, but I made sure to fill each word with venom. Where did you get those pictures? Some gore site? Calm down. I don't know what you mean by dead girls. Milos, I've already told you that this isn't funny. Just apologize and we can put this past us. There was another moment of silence before Milos spoke again. Greg, listen to me. I don't know what you saw, but I can assure you I didn't have anything to do with it. Do you need me to contact the police? You've scared me enough, goddammit. Isn't it enough that... A shrill scream from upstairs cut me off. My brain didn't bother to register anything until I reached my wife. I was downstairs, and then I was upstairs, like I had teleported. It was afterward when I became aware that I'd rammed my right big toe onto the bottom step while sprinting, trailing blood up to my bedroom. My wife was pressed against the bedroom wall, opposite the window, her package jettisoned into the center of the room. I'd no need to ask her what was wrong. She was already pointing. The window now had something scrawled into the glass. 3 symbols in a vertical column. X, I, I. Roman numerals of 12. And below this, nailed to the sill, was a crude baby doll, its eyes X'd out, given a malevolent smile, with black string. The police were already on their way. Milos had contacted them after I dropped the telephone. I was going to search the house, but I realized that the message in the window was carved from the outside. I settled, unlocking every feasible entrance to the house, not bothering to question how someone could have reached our bedroom window on the second floor without a ladder. After everything was done, my wife and I sat in the bedroom. She must have been crying. I remember her shaking in my arms. I know I should have been trying to comfort her, but I spent every moment of that agonizing wait for the police staring at the window. I practically flew to the door when I heard the urgent knocking, pulling my wife with me. I wasn't going to let her out of my sight again. I hesitated out of pure paranoia, leaving my wife to open it for me. Greg and Lisa Sykes? A middle-aged cop stood on our doorstep. Lisa invited him in, and the officer promptly yelled, "Jesus Christ!" The VCR was ablaze, melted to a rectangular block of slag. It must have been lit on fire earlier, and we just didn't notice up in our bedroom. The tape was still in there. It was going to be ruined. That was what had started all of this. That was what the police had to see. I grasped for the VHS slot and tried to ignore the pain from the burning metal. It took both my wife and the cop to pry me off, despite my protests that we needed to get the tape out of there. I eventually calmed down enough to explain what was going on to both of them. They both listened carefully, despite the insanity of the story. I told them everything. Where I got the VHS, the weird title cards, the flawless animation. Episode 11. The cops got a hold of Milos, but could ultimately find nothing incriminating. He couldn't answer any of the questions either, insisting that he had never seen the tape before he found it in the attic. We haven't spoken since. The case was eventually dismissed as harassment. I had no point to prove since the evidence had been destroyed. Try as I did, I couldn't get the VCR to open to retrieve the corpse of the tape. My wife has been acting more uncomfortable, even after I stopped mentioning the tape and we got a new window. That final message after episode 11 somehow remained stuck on the screen, even after the tape should have been ruined. When I couldn't sleep that night, I translated it. Episode 12, coming soon. I worked at a body farm in Knoxville, Tennessee for the past 5 years as a forensic entomologist. For those who don't know what a body farm is a research and training facility where human decomposition can be studied in a variety of settings. In plain English, we watch dead people decompose. There are only 7 of these in existence across the entire United States. The farm itself is scattered with bodies of all types. Most of the bodies are given to us by the individual before death or by the family after. Sometimes, when nobody claims a body, the city will give it to us to use on our farm. We take bodies of every race, gender, body type, etc. It is important to know how a fat person decomposes compared to a skinny person, or a female in her mid-30s versus a female in her 80s. We place the bodies in different places. Some are left out in an open field in the sun, some are in the forest, some are in the water, and others are placed in cages to stop birds like vultures from being able to pick at the bodies. We do not cover or cage all bodies since there are birds in nature. Having a body farm is a very important part of law enforcement, helping solve murders and questionable deaths. A missing person could be found days, weeks, or even years later. By having a body farm, we can determine how long the person has been dead. The shape the body is in will give law enforcement lots of important details. If a body has been dead a few days, you might just see the beginning stages such as the smell of a rotten corpse and the maggots. There are lots and lots of maggots. As time goes on, the body may be bloated with all the gases, and later on the skin will turn a brownish color. It's a little like when a banana goes bad. It turns brown and mushy. Bodies are a lot like that. It also lets us study the environment after the body is decomposed. Did you know the vegetation where the body has rotted will die, leaving only a bare patch of dirt afterward? Even more interesting, when vegetation grows back in a place a body was at, after, the grass will be healthier and taller than the surrounding vegetation. Next time you're on a hike and you see a taller patch of grass, someone may have been murdered there. Kind of cool, right? The way the body farm is set up is a large, fenced-in rectangle area with the admin building in the front. Once outside, there is a large field with a small tree lining the side fence with a gate. At the back, there is a pond/swampy type area. On the right, it is a wooded area extended back away to the bordering fence. The total size is almost 5 acres. On the adjoining side of the wooded area fence is a restricted military area. Nobody knows exactly what they're doing on the other side of the fence. Hardly anyone even knows it exists, because publicly, they don't exist. For the past 5 years I've worked here, I've always wondered what they were hiding in there. The area is locked down like Area 51. There's the barbed wire topped fence, security cameras, armed guards posted 24/7, and motion detection lights around the perimeter. I could never stop thinking of why they would want to place something that important on a body farm and what type of weird experiments they might do inside those walls. I had to somehow find out. Some days I would walk close to the enclosure. You could see nothing since whatever they were hiding was on the other side of the wooded area. But I just wanted to see how close I could get to the fence before they sent someone or the motion detection cameras caught me. The answer is about 15 feet from the fence before you are noticed. One guard asked me what I was up to, but I just told him I was walking the grounds, checking on the bodies, and apologized for him having to come out. He bought the excuse and seemed happy not to accidentally cross any decaying bodies on our side. I was given a warning by my supervisor and told to stay away from the fence.
Yeah, we like scary stories at night. They give you something to sleep by, you know? When you're going to sleep tonight, you can let these scary
I'm sure
stories
the
run around
military
in your
bosses
head
were
until
not
you get
happy someone was
tired.
prowling along their fence. Over the next few weeks, I continued to visit this part of the fence and stay there for longer and longer, and luckily,
Oh,
nobody ever
yeah.
came to check things out. I threw some sticks over the fence to see if it would trip a motion detector, but again, nothing happened. A dead zone. This might be the place I've been searching for. Curiosity has always gotten the best of me. I started to make my plan to break in and see what they were doing over there. I put a wire cutter in my work backpack and cut a small section of the fence until it was large enough for me to squeeze through. I waited for 8 weeks and the fence was never repaired. It looked like I had my way inside. I just had to work up the nerve to sneak in. I finally decided to do it. On the day of my attempt, I left work early for an appointment and then came back later to finish my shift. It gave me a great excuse for working over to catch up on my hours. After everyone left, I clocked out and moved my truck to a parking lot close by. Changed my clothes, then walked back to the body farm and snuck in the side gate using my keys. I made my way to the fence and took a small break. I quickly thought about what might happen if they caught me. Would they kill me? The body farm would be a perfect place to dump a dead body, right? I took a deep breath to calm my nerves and pushed on the slit in the fence. As I slipped through the fence, I accidentally scratched the inside part of my hand, grabbing the cut fence. Some blood started to appear, but hopefully it wouldn't leave any on the fence. I'll have to wash it off tomorrow during my shift. I made it through the fence and waited for motion lights or alarms to go off, but there was only silence. I was in. I slowly walked through the forest, trying my best not to make a sound or move quickly enough to catch anybody's attention. Eventually, I made my way to a clearing in the trees and looked out to see an open field, then 3 buildings. There was nothing here. It was just 3 small buildings in an open field. One building was larger than the other 2. I assumed that is where the headquarters was. For all the secrecy and security, they are running a small operation. Whatever they are doing must be inside one of the buildings. I need to get closer to the buildings and maybe I can catch a glimpse inside. I snuck around to the back side of the building. The rear side was closer and gave me a better view. I think I found what I was looking for. Behind the closest building, there were 4 of the body cages with what looked like 4 bodies inside. They looked like the same ones we were using to keep birds off the dead bodies on our side. Why would they do body farm experiments when they could just use our body farm instead? It would be too dangerous to risk moving out of the wooded area, so I just sat and watched. Maybe I would see someone coming or going and could learn a little more about what they were doing here. I could always come back and watch more now that I had a way in. After about an hour, someone came out of the building, wearing a face mask and gloves. I prayed they had not seen me. Then he stopped at the cages. Why would he be going to look at a dead body in the middle of the night in basically a hazmat suit? They're dead bodies. It's a bit overkill. He grabbed what looked like a stick off the top of the cage and then poked the body inside the first cage. The body rolled over and got up on all 4s, back touching the top of the cage. The guard threw something inside the cell and it started to devour its food like a starving dog. He banged on the cage of the next one, and the body inside threw itself against the cage and let out a growl. This one kept throwing itself against the cage, trying to get the guard, but eventually settled for its meal. The third cage must have been empty as he passed it by. He walked up to the 4th cage, and the body inside was already up on all 4s, waiting for him. This one seemed different. This one looked more alive than the others. Then it spoke. "Please, just kill me. Don't turn me into one of those." The guard ignored this one and threw something in the cage, then went back inside. "This is what I came for. This is what they have been keeping secret."
Oh,
He measured.
yeah. Now's your chance. Now's your chance to say anything that you want as far as a scary story. The chat lines are now open. We appreciate you for coming into the Nighttime is Fright Time with Tossed Out. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Feel free to key up in the chat section or to request joining the screen, and you can come on with just your microphone, or you can come on with a video and a mic, and you can tell one of your scary stories. You might have a UFO story, something scary, and we'd all love to hear it. So we'll go ahead and give you a couple minutes here, and the chat lines are now open. And if you guys don't want to do that, I understand. Some people don't like going in broadcast. So if you don't want to go in the broadcast, then the show is not going to stay on much longer. We've got other things to do. But we gave over an hour to you. Peace.
And pointed at the cage next to him. "What the hell are those things?" I asked as I looked at the things in the cages. The one next to us had to be a decaying body that had been dead for about 6 months, but somehow was still alive. The skin had a brownish tint to it, and the arms and legs had started to rot. The body and head itself was in surprising shape compared to its limbs. "The virus, it kills everything non-essential to life. That is why half of it is rotting," he said. "Their mind is gone. All they care about is keeping the virus alive by feeding it." "Zombies? That's impossible," I said, staring at one in disbelief. "How is it even alive with its body decaying?" "The only thing alive on those is the virus. The rest is a shell," he said. "Holy crap. Is it contagious?" I asked. "It's a virus. Of course it is. Right now, it only spreads by open cuts, but it's evolving. It could eventually turn airborne." He was still talking when he was interrupted. "What the hell is going on out there?" a guard yelled. "Shut the hell up before I beat you with a stick again." The guard slammed the door shut. "Damn, I gotta go. I can't be caught. They will turn me into one of those things if they catch me," I said. "Please, you gotta help me," the sickly one said as he reached out and grabbed my hand. "I'm not one of them yet. You gotta help me." "I can't right now," I said and pulled my arm away. "I've got to get out of here." I looked at the buildings to make sure no guards were watching and ran back into the wooded area. Somehow I made it back to the relative safety of the woods. I backtracked to where I'd cut the hole in the fence and pushed myself through. I took the side gate out and walked back to my truck. I drove home, trying to grasp what I had seen. I wish I'd just followed the rules and forgot about the restricted area. My curiosity always screws me over. I took a shower and cleaned off. I put some triple antibiotic where I'd cut my hand on the fence and covered it with a band-aid. Once I lay down in my bed, exhaustion overtook me and I fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling like hell. I looked at my phone and had 7 missed calls from work, and it was already 2 p.m. I tried to lift my head up off my pillow, but I was too weak. I closed my eyes and fell back asleep. Josh? Josh! I heard my girlfriend saying while someone was shaking my body. I opened my eyes and saw her leaning over me. Ashley, what are you doing? I tried to say, but it came out as a whisper. You're awake, she said. You've been sleeping for 3 days. I was about to call an ambulance. When I came to check on you yesterday, you had a fever of over 104. I was going to call an ambulance, but you said to just let you sleep and rolled over. I'm okay, really, I said. I wasn't really okay, but I was at least awake. That is an improvement. What is my temperature now? 101. It was just a small virus or something I must have caught, I said. Wait, did I just say virus? Oh no. Wait, I bet it was all just a dream. Fever dreams can be crazy. That must be it. I looked down and saw my left hand still had a bandage on it. What happened to my hand? I asked. It was like that when I came over, Ashley said. You worked late the other night. I must have went to bed sick when you got home. There is no way I could have caught that virus. I must have caught something else. And I am getting better. It has been a few days, and I'm feeling better. But I am worried. I think I might have the virus. Thinking back on the night, the one in the cage grabbed my hand with a cut on it. It is possible I contracted the virus from him. It makes sense of how I got it, and also explains the flu-like symptoms. Even worse, Ashley is now in bed, sick with a high fever. I think she may have caught it from me. I don't know what to do next. If I take her to a doctor, they will discover the virus and have her quarantined. Then she will tell them she caught it from me. Once the military doctors discover we caught the virus, they will either have us killed or put into the cages as another experiment. The only other option we have is to run when she is feeling better. I don't know how I'm going to explain this to her. I just hope that the virus is only contagious when you have a fever. We're screwed.
Oh yeah. You know, it's a scary time. And well, it's my pleasure to be able to to help scare people and to provide a little bit of relaxation so you don't have to be all stressed out. I hope this was a good show for you, and I hope you all had a good time. Look for the show again. We'll try to do it like, maybe Wednesdays and Sundays. Oh man, I hope that this was fun for you like it was for me. I'm Ganji Dankman, and I just love being scared. Nighttime is fright time, man. Sleep with it. Peace.